Good day to you. I am Pastor Neil Weemus, and this is going to be a recording of something that I dealt with and I taught when I was at the Higher Things Youth Conference at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Last week, I was there with some of our high school youth. We had five that went from here at St. Paul and Ida Grove, and we took the several hour drive and we spent those days there. Twice I led a breakaway that explored this one basic question: how old was Jesus when he was crucified? That was the question. And this recording here is going to be a recorded version of it, and I'm going to try to fly through this. And I'm going to have I have a lot of tabs open right now on my browser, and I have a couple other resources I'm going to go through to explain. As we could talk about some of these topics. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna take a little bit back down memory lane to my past. So I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, but later in life, my dad had a job transfer, and we ended up moving to a suburb of Des Moines. And when I was going to that church, the church that I grew up in, the church has confirmed, the church has an ordained at as a pastor. Um, I remember during catechetical instruction, we learned from a book that's called Catechetical Helps. Now, I don't have a copy of that. I think in my other office next door over, I have an updated version of it. But there was a question that came up in there, and the question went like this. It was very simple. How old was Jesus when he was crucified? Very simple question, right? And the answer was 33 years old. And I thought nothing of it. I answered it right. It was one of the questions I actually got right. I'll be honest with you, I was not the best student during catechism instruction. And yeah, so but anyways, fast forward a few years. I uh went to seminary in St. Louis, or not seminary, went to Concordia University of Wisconsin for my undergraduate studies. And I got kind of interested and began researching the subject of apologetics, that is, the defending of the Christian faith. And I became curious as to when was Jesus actually crucified. And the date that I pinned down, and I'll get to this a little bit later, uh, the age of Jesus being 33 at the date of his crucifixion became questionable because the math just did not add up. All right. So, this is why I began to explore this question: how old was Jesus really at the age of the crucifixion? Now, if we're going to get smart, or you want to be a smarty pants, you can say he was eternal because he's God in the flesh. Okay, true, but we're talking about how old was he in terms of his earthly ministry, all right? Okay. So in order to explore this, we're going to go straight to the scriptures themselves, right? So I'm going to bring up onto the screen here. So I have a bunch of tabs open. I could have used logos for my Bible, but I didn't want to have too many windows open. I just have a bunch of tabs scattered across the top. All right. So the first question is, we look at Luke chapter 2. One of the things that's helpful when we're exploring this question of when is actually to look at the who. Who is involved? So Luke chapter 2 is dealing with the birth of Jesus, right? So we have to look at the people who are mentioned. So we got David is mentioned. Well, that doesn't really help because he's just telling you that this is the house of David. Well, that doesn't really help. David was a long time before this. It has mentioned Mary and Joseph, but Mary and Joseph don't really help. The key people we want to look at are these two: Caesar Augustus and Quirinius, who was governor of Syria. So it says right here, this was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And Syria. And I'm going to come back to this little footnote a little bit later. But we're going to look at Caesar Augustus first. So Caesar Augustus? He's probably the easiest. He's pretty much the easiest guy to track down in terms of dating. So Caesar Augustus was in terms of Roman emperors, he's one of the two most best known. There is Julius Caesar, who the month of July this month is named after, and there's Caesar Augustus, who the month of August is named after. So two very significant people in terms of history. Well, we have exact dates as to when he reigned as emperor. January 16th of 27 BC, and then his reign ended on August 19th of 14 AD. So that is a 41 year span. And I mean, we know that Jesus is born somewhere in there, but it gives us a pretty big window. And it really doesn't help us much. And I got to put a little bit of a disclaimer at this moment. I'm going to use the designation of BC and AD. I am not going to say BCE or CE. And there's a reason. I told the kids this last week, the same thing. BCE means before Common Era. CE means Common Era. And the honest question I have is, what on earth does that mean? And why use that when I get the reality, and this is going to come through as we go through this discussion. I realize that Jesus was not actually born at 1 BC. That's going to become abundantly clear as we get to go through this. So the before Christ designation is not entirely accurate. Secondly, I get that not every person is a Christian. And I'm going to, at best as I can, I will respect that reality. I will recognize that reality. But if we're talking purely from an academic standpoint, the BC and AD designation, BC, which means before Christ, AD, which means Anno Domini, which is Latin for Year of Our Lord, has been the designation for over 1,000 years. There's so much text, so much documents that is using that designation. And all of a sudden, in the last 20, 30 years, you're using a designation that no one else used, and you consistently use it. That means what's going to happen is you're going to have people who are going up to college, academia, whatever, and they're learning, and they're going to come across, if you go for this BCE, CE for long enough, they're going to come across old documents where they say AD, and they're not going to have a clue what it's talking about because you decided to use a designation that no one else ever used. It is poor scholarship. It's bad for history. It's bad for academia. I get some of you are really gung-ho on the separation of church and state stuff, but it is bad for knowledge. It's bad for learning. Stick with the BC. Stick with the AD. And there are many atheists who would agree with me for the exact reasons I just laid out. Okay? So, all right. Let's back to it. Okay, so back to the dating. So Augustus Caesar, we're establishing he doesn't really help us much because we got to find somewhere within a 41-year period that Jesus was born. Not a lot of help. Let's look at this Quirinius of Syria. So I forgot to bring this up. So we're going to look at his Wikipedia. So right there it says that he, after the banishment of Ethnarch Herod Archelaus from the Tetrarchy of Judea in AD 6, Quirinius was appointed legate governor of Syria. So 6 AD is when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Okay, so that means Jesus must have been born after 1 AD. Well, we're going to get to it a little bit why this is a bit one of those conundrums. I'm going to straight up admit right here, right now, because we're going to get to Herod. Herod was definitely dead before 6 BC. Or 6 AD, sorry, 6 AD. Which means that line, this was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. It creates a conundrum. And there's a lot of theories as to what is going on there. So the English Standard Version, which you see popped up here, actually has a little footnote right next to the word when. It says, or this was the registration before Quirinius was governor of Syria. So they suggest there may be a variant there. There's something going on there. I've heard 3 or 4 different theories as to what happened with that text, and I don't have a good answer to that. People might say that, oh, see, we can't trust the Bible, but we're talking about really, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty insignificant detail. Uh, when all the, especially when, as we're going to go through, we're going to see a lot of things where the Bible is going to square up pretty well. So, all right, so we're going to keep going here. So Luke 2 really just isn't helping us out much. So we're going to go to the other birth narrative of Jesus. So we're going to go to, Matthew chapter 1. And we just see a genealogy. Okay, that's not going to help us out. Tells us about Mary and Joseph and Jesus. Okay, that doesn't help us much either. Because they were not significant. I mean, in terms of our exercise right now, they're not going to help us with the historical markers. So let's go on to Matthew chapter 2. And then we read about in the days of Herod the king. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Now we have some dating. So Herod began his reign in 37, and it lasted so you can see it right there, could go to 4 BC. Look, even Wikipedia is using the BCE. It annoys me. But anyways, 4 BC or 1 BC. There's 2 different date possibilities that we see there. So there's various debates as to when Herod actually died. And that does create a little bit of a conundrum. And the reason why Herod's dates are going to be the most helpful is because Matthew 2 has this little detail at the very end. So Jesus I should say Mary and Joseph, along with the baby Jesus, have to flee Bethlehem because Herod is seeking to kill Jesus. And so he kills all the children in Bethlehem. All the male children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. And so they flee to Egypt. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, they flee to Egypt, but they eventually able to leave, because here at verse 19 it says, but when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, rise, take the child and his mother. So they take the child, and if you look it up, I had to pause and come back because I had to go look at the Greek, and the Greek there is paidion, which quite often refers to a child, an infant, very young child. So Jesus is probably very young, at least younger than 5 years old, and this is when Herod died. So if Herod died in one, you could put the birth of Jesus anywhere from, maybe a year before that. So anywhere from 2 to even 6 BCE. But if Herod died in 4, there I said BCE. Oh, I did it. Sorry. If you go 4, you could be talking 6 to even 9 BC, which I think that might be a little bit far. And possibly anywhere in between. So we don't have a lot of precision right here. You could honestly, based on what we know about the birth of Jesus, the details we know, because even like here, like when Jesus flees Bethlehem, his parents with Jesus, we don't actually know how old he was, because it says that he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under. Now, does this mean that Jesus was 2 years old? Well, note he says 2 years old or under. That means Herod doesn't know how old Jesus is. He's just kind of guessing. He's figuring if he could get if he picks 2 years old, he's going to get him, you know? And so the only thing we know is that Jesus was older than 40 days old. And we know because of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus at 40 days went to Bethlehem. He was dedicated, not Bethlehem, to Jerusalem, where he was dedicated at the temple. And so they would not have gone to the temple. They would not have gone to Jerusalem if Herod was hunting him down. So it's past 40 days, but it's under 2 years. So he's somewhere between 40 days old and 2 years old when they flee to Egypt. And how long he was in Egypt, we don't know. It doesn't really tell us. And there's a lot of vagueness. There's a lot of uncertainty. Um, if I were guessing, Jesus could have been born at earliest 6 or 7 BC. Yeah, I did this for the kids on Sunday. I mean, on at the higher things, I did the 6-7 thing. Yeah, okay, you got it. That one occasion of it, but so at the earliest 6 or 7 BC, at latest 2 or 3 BC, for his birth. Um, Now here's a fun little exploration. One of the questions is, what time of the year was Jesus born? And this is where the Gospels are going to help us out a little bit. So Luke chapter 1. So we celebrate Christmas at December 25th, right? Is it possible that Jesus was born on December 25th? Because we've all heard it said many times, there's no way he was born on December 25th. Don't you know? Those shepherds were out in the fields at night in the winter. They would not have been outside in the winter. And understand there's a level of truth to that. Some people I think people have given some bad arguments against that. They said, well, it's not very cold in Israel. I'm like, it would have been cold for them. If you're comparing it to Minnesota in January, yeah, it's pretty warm, but you got to compare Jerusalem or Bethlehem in December to Bethlehem in August or whatever. It's going to be cold for them. Again, not for people from Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, whatever. So that's not really a good argument. But there is probably the best argument is just the simple reality, because the whole argument is there's sheep and shepherds out at night. Well, most of them actually would be indoors during the winter. The exception to that rule is in the city of Bethlehem, because Bethlehem would raise sheep for Passover, which would be a few months away, and they would be outside at night. So there is an exception to that rule. So that argument is not perfect to explain that it was not in the winter. But is there a way we can argue from Scripture that Jesus was born on or around or near December 25th? And the answer is going to be found in this one little detail. It says that there was a priest named Zachariah of the division of Abia. Which fun little trivia, if you want to look up the divisions and read about them, you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 24, and you'll find out about them. And it's really kind of cool because the division of the word Abia means Yahweh is my father. The division that immediately follows Abia is the division of Jesus, which, by the way, whenever you read Hebrew or whenever you read anything in the Bible and come across the letter J, you shouldn't actually say J like John or James or whatever. You should actually say James or Johannes, because they didn't have hard J's like we do in English. They had soft J's. I can't help but think of the movie Anchorman. In Anchorman, there's this little bit where Ron Burgundy is sitting there. It's like, we're going to try out this new fad. It's called jogging, but maybe it could be a soft J. It could be jogging, and so that's the way all J's work in Greek and Hebrew. They're all soft J's, and so that's how you pronounce whenever you see like Jerusalem, Jesus, or here Abia. Well, anyways, going back to it, the division that immediately follows Abia is the division of Yeshua, which is the Hebrew variation of Jesus, which means Yahweh saves. So that's kind of a neat little factoid. But back to the division of Abia. Why is this relevant to this conversation of what time of the year Jesus was born? And a couple weeks ago, I came across a great chart, really intriguing chart. And I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to use an Excel sheet. You can see it on the screen. I found this online. And some people have taken the time to calculate the division. So we're looking for when did the division of Abia serve. So in 8, you see they're serving December 29th. By the way, each division served twice a year. So here you see you only see December, you only see 8 BC. December 29th is when they would have served. So this is going to show you kind of the extent of the variation and when they might serve. So let's see, Abia. Can't find it here. Apologize. I'm trying to. So 7 BC, Abia. There you see them serving November 31st. 6 BC. This is one that's going to be most relevant to our conversation here. Right there, you see Abia, October 2nd. Right there is when they serve. So this is the one that we're going to look at. But notice how wildly they vary. October 2nd, if it's in 6 BC, but if it's in 5 BC, you're looking at September 2nd. Not a wild, little bit of variation. But here, if you go into 4 BC, now you're at August 4th. It wildly varies based upon the year. But anyways, I would go back to this one. 6 BC. If it is 6 BC, when Zechariah is visited by the angel to let him know that Elizabeth was pregnant with John the Baptist, it would be October 2nd, okay? So we have that open. So let me go to Luke chapter 1. So you see it right there on the screen. So if it's October 2nd that Zechariah is visited, right? Now we got to do a little bit of math. Sorry, we're doing math here. So October 2nd, you go to verse 26. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. Now, 6th month from what? 6th month of the year? Probably not. Because you have to kind of get into the question of when did the New Year count for. Jewish culture, some cultures, March was the first month of the year. So I guess I could push into September. But the much more likely, the 6th month here is referring to the 6th month of the pregnancy, the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. So you're looking for 6 months from October 2nd. So what is 6 months? So November, December, January, February, March, April. So April 2nd. So April 2nd is when the angel Gabriel, if this date is accurate, angel Gabriel visits Mary, a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. So we're looking at April 2nd. Add 9 months for your typical pregnancy, and you're at January 2nd. So which means December 25th, not quite. But it does mean that Jesus could have possibly been born within the 12 months, the 12 days, 12 days of Christmas. It is possible. but there's some variables, namely the year he was born. If he was born in a different year, this entire question's out the window. So if Jesus was born in 5 BC, actually take that back. That would have actually put his birth into 4 BC, actually. Think about it, because if it's early January. So it'd be very early 4 BC. Then it would be possible. But there's a lot of variables in there to account for. So we don't know exactly the date of Jesus' birth, and we don't know the year at this point. So the starting of our calculation is not going good. So let's see if we could do a little bit better with the crucifixion date. So we're going to have to go forward to Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3 begins with these words. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Oh, there we go. We got a big name. Another Caesar. So you remember we talked about Caesar Augustus. And so when did Caesar Augustus end his reign? Well, it was 14 AD, Anno Domini. So the year 14, Tiberius began his reign, and he reigned until 37 AD. So and this gets even more specific, because it says in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So this is looking at 29 AD, but there's a little bit of a complication here, because some people actually will mark the start of Tiberius Caesar's reign at 12 BC due to some nuances in the dating. And if that is the case, then we could push backwards to what is being referenced here to being 27 AD. So anywhere from 27 to 29 AD is what's going on right here. And so John the Baptist is doing his preaching, yada, yada, yada. And this says Jesus, when he began his ministry, when he was baptized, was about 30 years old. So this is actually where the origin of that 33 years old comes from. And this discussion is going to be somewhat relevant to our conversation. So they see that Jesus was 30 years old at the start of his ministry. It's like, okay, he was 30 years old. So and then they look at how many Passovers were there recorded in the Gospel of John in regards to Jesus' earthly ministry, and they find there's 3. So add 3 to 30, and you got 33. The problem with that is John in his own gospel admits that if everything that Jesus ever did was recorded, I suppose every book in the world would not be enough to contain it. So we don't know that that is every Passover of Jesus' earthly ministry. And then the second problem is it doesn't say that Jesus was exactly 30 years. It says Jesus was about 30 years of age. And I think really could expand that anywhere from 27 to 34 years old. Within reason on that about range. So, that's not exactly precise. But the number of the Passovers is relevant, because when we are trying to find the date of the crucifixion, there are a few variables that we absolutely have to get. Anybody that's grown up in a church, a confessional church body, has confessed the Apostles' Nicene Creed throughout their life. And one of the lines that they might remember was, Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We know that. So Pontius Pilate was the one in charge when Jesus was crucified. So we need to find the year that Pilate was the prefect of Judea, right? So according to Wikipedia, is Wikipedia always reliable? No, but we'll just use it. We'll just go with it, all right? we're looking at 26 to 36 AD for the reign of Pontius Pilate. So we need to find a year between 26 and 36 AD that for Jesus' crucifixion. Because it cannot be before 26, it can't be after 36, because Pilate wasn't there. That's the first part. Second part, Jesus was crucified on a Friday. Okay? There's lots of Fridays scattered. There's 52 Fridays in a year or whatever. So that's not well, that's not always accurate. But anyways, we have many Fridays scattered throughout the year, so that's entirely reliable. But the more important data is that Jesus was crucified on the 14th of Nisan, as part of the Jewish calendar. It's the day that the lambs are sacrificed in connection with Passover. So that means Jesus had to have been crucified. He was crucified on a Friday, which landed on the 14th of Nisan. So we have to find a year in between 26 and 36 AD when the 14th of Nisan landed on a Friday. Now, to narrow this even more is that statement about the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. At earliest, like I said, we're talking this has to be at least 27 AD, and you have to fit in 3 Passovers. So we've narrowed the years even farther. So which means the date of the crucifixion has to be between 30 and 36. So now we have to find a year that the 14th of Nisan lands on a Friday in between 30 and 36 AD. And by the way, the reason why we know Jesus was crucified on a Friday is because they took the bodies down from the cross. They made sure they were dead because the Sabbath began that evening. The Sabbath under Jewish calendar is on Friday. So they had to get them down before sundown because the Sabbath began. So there are actually only 2 legitimate dates. And that would be March 29th of 30 or April 13th of 33 AD. Those are the only 2 real possible dates. I'm going to actually... these are the dates. If you could read backwards, sorry, it's mirrored. But March 29th, 30 AD or April 3rd, 33 AD is the dates that we're looking at for the possible days that when Jesus was crucified, based upon historical data. So, what else do we have to pinpoint those dates? So we're going to look at the crucifixion itself, the events surrounding and the details surrounding the crucifixion. So, all right, so as we begin this journey, it's going to require for us to look at a lot of the Gospels, and we're going to specifically look at the events surrounding Pontius Pilate. One of the things that is consistent throughout the Gospels is that Pontius Pilate doesn't want Jesus crucified. He believes Jesus should be let go. He doesn't really believe anything should be done to Jesus. Although he does punish Jesus in order to try to appease the crowd. But he doesn't want Jesus dead. He doesn't want him to crucify him. He doesn't believe he deserves it. And this kind of gets exacerbated by this little detail. Let's see here. I mean, listen to this. This is what Matthew's account says. It says, now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now that dream, I mean, that would have freaked him out. That would have freaked Pilate out because Pilate knew the story. Pilate is a Roman politician, and every Roman politician knew the story of the Ides of March. How Julius Caesar, when he went to town, his wife told him, "Don't go there, don't go," and he didn't listen to her. And he ended up being assassinated. And when he ended up being assassinated. So because of that reason, Roman politicians were very freaky about dreams. And so what this his wife coming in a very similar scenario, telling him don't have anything to do with this righteous man, should have freaked him out. So why doesn't he just let Jesus go? Well, there's history going on. And it has to do with the Pilate had a bit of a rocky run in Judea for a while. There was an incident where he used the treasury of the temple to build the aqueducts. That led to some bloodshed. There was an incident involving some Roman shields that were all around the city of Jerusalem, and this really agitated the crowds. It agitated them because of the fact that Jews did not like they don't like Gentiles ruling over them. If anybody's to rule over them, it's going to be a Jew. They did not like Pilate at all because he was a Gentile. And so for him to decorate the city with the image of their Gentile emperor would absolutely grind their gears. And so there was this conundrum. I'm going to get to this in a little bit, more detail into this a little bit. But there was, Pilate kept it up, and there was a lot of bloodshed, and a letter was sent to Tiberius Caesar, who was emperor at the time, and it basically said that your Roman governor, your Roman prefect, he does not know how to govern these people in Judea. He won't take down those Roman shields. And he was ordered very strictly to take him down. Well, after all these problems, Pilate got a letter from Tiberius Caesar, and it said, "If there is one more issue, one more problem in Judea, your time there will be expired." And which is very much saying, you will be executed. So Pilate is afraid of this riot, because if a riot happens, they'll squash the riot, and then Tiberius will execute Pilate. So Pilate right now is choosing, throughout the trial, he's choosing between Jesus and his own life. So why is Pilate in this issue to begin with? Why is he even involved? Well, it says, there's this little line in the Gospel of John. Verse 31, it says, John chapter 8, verse 31, it says, "Pilate said to them, 'Take him,'" Jesus, "'yourselves, and judge him by your own law.' The Jews said to him, 'It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death.'" Now, when they say that, it is not lawful, they're not talking about the Torah, they're not talking about the Old Testament, they're talking about Roman law, because a decree that Pilate really was beginning to strictly enforce. And note, some of these details I'm talking about, they don't work before 30 AD. So example, the Roman shields I just told you about, that was after March 29, 30 AD. What I'm talking about here in 30 AD, they might have been able to kill Jesus without Pilate's authority. They might have gotten away with it. But there is a period where they were getting really bad about executing people. Think, for example, John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. They're about to stone her to death. There was a time that they could have done that, and they could have done that to Jesus. And there's a time after this that they end up being able to do this because they ended up, that's what they did to Stephen, that's what they did to James. But here, they don't have that authority. They needed Pilate. 30 AD, it's not an issue. In 33, they need Pilate's help to have Jesus crucified. Because Pilate was tired of all what they were doing, and he decided, you need to come to me to do whatever you're planning to do. So now so far we have 2 markers against the 30 days. So we're pointing towards 33 so far with 2 details. Third detail, Luke 23 has this little detail where Jesus goes before Herod, not Herod the Great, but Herod's son. He goes before Herod, and it says that Herod did not punish Jesus. So actually here, verse 12, it says, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Well, remember that little story about the Roman shields I just told you about? Do you know who it was that sent the letter to Tiberius Caesar complaining about Pilate? It was Herod. Because, see, Herod wanted control of Judea. He wanted Pilate's job, just as his father had it. And so he was known to send these letters and scheming against Pilate to try to get Pilate to lose his position. And because here's the deal, is when that whole Roman shield thing is, if Pilate had taken them down, this is what Herod would have done. He would have written a letter all the same. He would have said, Dear Caesar, your Roman prefect is not loyal to you. He took your shields down in the city. No matter what Pilate did, he was going to be in trouble because of Herod scheming and plotting. They were not friends, but now they become friends. Before in 30, that doesn't work. They were definitely not friends in 30 AD. In 33, sounds possible. All right? Going back to John we're going to go back to the Gospel of John. John chapter 19, so Jesus is on trial. There's this little point where John 19, verse 12. So it says right here, from then on, Pilate sought to release Jesus, but the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Which, first off, this is showing the depths of how far the Jewish leaders, Caiaphas and company, have fallen, because they're remember, they don't like Gentiles. Here they are very boldly claiming Caesar. I mean, we have no king but Caesar. I mean, that's how it ends with. And Tiberius Caesar was not a good man. Just research the history. He was an awful dude. And yet they're willing to lay claim to them. This is how much vengeance, they're just foaming at the mouth, wanting Jesus crucified. But let's go into the history here. Why is this? Because note what, as soon as they said this, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement in Aramaic Gabbatha. So basically, Pilate's now realizing Jesus is going to be crucified. And he's run out of games. And that you are not Caesar's friend, that changed Pilate's demeanor immediately. And there's a reason. Has to do with this man, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, who died October 18th, AD 31, at the age of 50. Why did he die? How did he die? He was executed for sedition and rebellion. Sejanus tried to overthrow Tiberius to make himself the new Caesar. And when he did that, he was executed. His family was executed. His friends were executed. And anybody who had any connection to Sejanus, their loyalty, their friendship was held in question. Well, a little bit of historical trivia. Guess who appointed Pontius Pilate to Judea? It was Sejanus. So, Pilate was not so close to Sejanus that he was executed, clearly. But he was close enough that Caesar was keeping a close eye on Pilate's loyalty. And so when the crowd said, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend, in essence, they are saying, because remember, news didn't travel as fast back then, which means news lingered a little bit longer. The news, what Sejanus did, was still very fresh in their memory. They are telling him, if you let Jesus go, we're going to send a letter to Caesar and saying, your prefect Pilate is no friend of yours. He is no different than Sejanus. In other words, they are threatening Pilate. And note, when did that happen? October 18th, AD 31, and March 29th, 30 does not work. That is a third strike against March 29th of 30 AD. We have one more strike against that date. And it's going to come from Matthew chapter 27. And by the way, you have a similar not 27, 28. Oh, 27's right. Sorry, I'm messing up a little bit here. Okay. So, Matthew 27, verse 45. And a very similar verse is written in the Gospels of Mark and Luke. It says, now from the 6th hour, that is 9 a.m., not 9 a.m., noon, sorry. From the 6th hour, noon, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, this man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge. And I'm going to go down a little bit to verse 51. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. So, there was a darkness, the earth shook. This is where we're going to go to this next detail. Phlegon, born about AD 80, was a secular historian, so Greco-Roman, who lived in the 2nd century. There are 2 books credited to his name, the Chronicles and the Olympiads. Little is known about Phlegon, but he made reference to Christ. And here's the reference I'm going to highlight from. You can find this quote in many times. I am not promoting Never Thirsty like the Master Ministries. I know nothing about it, but I found the quote, and there's some nice little handy details. I do like the reference there. Gary Habermas. Oh, tell you, read about Gary Habermas. That man's so fascinating. He's got some great books. But anyways, it says, in the 4th year, however, of Olympiad 202, an eclipse of the sun happened, greater and more excellent than any that had happened before it at the 6th hour. Day turned into dark night, so that the stars were seen in the sky, and an earthquake in Bithynia toppled many buildings of the city of Nicaea. So That's one of the variations of the quote. So what you have here is there was a darkness that happened at the 6th hour, and the earth shook. Pretty much what we just read about in Matthew 27. And the date, you have an exact, precise year. The 4th year of the Olympiad 202. When is that? That is between July of 33 and July of 32 and June of 33. So we have 4 markers as to when this would be. That Jesus was crucified, most based on all historical data. The most likely date is Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. And the reason why I chose to do this as a topic at Higher Things this year was a few reasons. One was that this year, Good Friday actually did land on Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. Which means Maundy Thursday, which we celebrated April 2nd, was the actual likely date of April 2nd of the first Maundy Thursday. Palm Sunday coincided with the original Palm Sunday. You could say the same thing about Easter, Ascension, Pentecost. All those days would actually land on the actual historical date. So what do we have? How old is Jesus based upon this data? We have a definite date for his crucifixion, but the problem is we don't have a definite date for his birth. And because of that, we have anywhere from 39 or even 40 years old to 35. So anywhere from 35 to 40 years old for his age at the point of the crucifixion. It puts the 33-year-old out very unlikely. And this would work with scripture because there is a line in the Gospel of John where the crowds say to him, "You are not yet 50 years old and yet you lecture us." That line makes more sense if he's closer to 50 than he is to 30. If he's a little bit older than 30 years old. St. Irenaeus, he argued that Jesus was 46 years old at the time of his crucifixion, based upon the line where they say it took us 46 years to build this temple, and yet you'll just rebuild it in 3 days. I think that's kind of a stretch, but it does show that there is a history of people not thinking he was 33 at the age of the crucifixion. The honest truth is we don't really know the age. And so the question of whether or not the age of Jesus matters is hopefully not, because we don't really know. We just don't know. And so it comes down to why do I talk about this? I'm at 53 minutes on this recording. I went through this much quicker with the group because I didn't go into as detailed. Why does it matter? And the answer is not about the answer. It's about the exploration to the answer. Because what I just did, is I worked through historical data outside of the New Testament and matched it up with the data of the New Testament. And it shows, it's a reminder. A big discussion happened. So in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, of which I'm a pastor, a couple of weeks ago, we were in the midst of an election for Synod president. And some stones were thrown at Dr. Joel Bierman, because he makes the claim that our ultimate authority does not come from the scriptures, rather comes from Jesus. And that is accurate. Because here is the reality. If Jesus Christ was never born, never crucified, and never rose from the dead, then the New Testament is nothing but a scrap of paper that you could throw to the fire. But if he did, in fact, was indeed born during the reign of Caesar Augustus, Herod the Great, prior to the time of Quirinius the governor, or however that works out, and if he truly was crucified under Pontius Pilate, died on April 3rd, 33 AD, rose from the dead on April 5th, 33 AD, then that means these scriptures would corroborate with all that historical data is absolutely true. It means that the faith that you have in Christ Jesus is not a dead faith that is just a matter of personal feelings, personal opinions. Like, oh, it just feels true to me. I like Jesus because it's kind of cool. Like, it's my favorite flavor of ice cream, or, my favorite store in the mall. It's just amongst a bunch of different options that really don't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. No. If Jesus really and truly died and rose from the dead, and to kind of go with C.S. Lewis said that if Christianity is not true, it is of no importance. But if it is true, it is the most important thing in the world. The one thing Christianity cannot be is of moderate importance. If false, it's a waste of time. We didn't have to go spend those 5 days in the sweltering heat of St. Louis, Missouri. We could have been doing any of a number of other things. We could have been enjoying time on the beach or whatever. But because Jesus Christ suffered and died and rose from the dead, we gathered together with 750 plus youth, teenagers, to worship the Most High God, to to confess their sins, to receive absolution, to receive his body, his very body, the body of the one who was crucified on April 3rd, 33 AD, who gave his body in the bread, his blood in the wine on April 2nd, 33 AD, before he was crucified. That same Jesus you receive in truth, in reality, for the forgiveness of your sins. And the truth is that he rose from the dead. And because he truly rose from the dead in history, that means that you too will rise from the dead in history. This is the hope we anchor on. And that's why this faith is to be on why we would have it on our lips, because there is no more beautiful truth, no more blessed truth in the reality that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And by him, you who have faith in his name, you who profess his name, you have life eternal. And it should be our longing, and it would be our longing that our neighbors, those who we come in contact with, that they too would know Jesus, and they too would believe, and they too would confess, and they too would have the life that we have. That's what it's about. It's not really about the answer. It's about that journey that tells us who we worship. So, there we go. I hope this was good for you. Blessings to you. I might do a video later, talk a little bit about the Higher Things experience. Next week, I will finally do my video about pastoral formation as we prepare for the Synod Convention. So, but until then, blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.